A 12-year-old black honor student is handcuffed in front of his entire class, his crime typing too fast on a school-issued laptop. The algorithm flagged his speed as suspicious, labeling him a digital threat. His teacher stood by, silent, his mother arriving breathless, screams just one word. Why? And the principal answers, "It's what the system told us." But what Elijah does next, no one sees coming. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The marble floors of Viridian Tech's new headquarters gleamed under the soft gold lighting, a monument to ambition and precision. On this Monday morning, everything was calibrated, from the temperature of the room to the polished cadence of CEO Marcus Devlin's voice, as he addressed a crowd of suits generals and billion-dollar investors. Behind him, a 30-foot digital screen pulsed with sleek animations, illustrating the AI-driven surveillance system that Viridian Tech had spent 6 years and nearly $3.4 billion developing. The audience, which included Department of Defense advisors and national security heads, leaned forward in anticipation. "This," Marcus declared with a subtle smile, "is how we end uncertainty. Predictive intelligence, faster than thought, smarter than instinct." The lights dimmed. The screen shifted to real-time simulation, a test city pulsing with activity. Red and green tracking lines mapping human movement, facial recognition locking onto mock targets. The tech was undeniable, chilling in power, elegant in execution. Then, just as Marcus opened his palm to present the final flourish, the moment Viridian's system would intercept a terrorist simulation before it even began, the screen blinked. A pause, a second blink. Then the entire screen shattered into code gibberish. Lines of unintelligible symbols raced vertically. The lights glitched. The background monitors flickered with a low mechanical buzz, like a machine choking on its own circuits. A long, dull beep echoed from the command panels. Then, darkness, silence. A soft murmur began at the back. Fingers tapped nervously on phones. The COO leaned over to the tech team. "What the hell is going on?" Marcus stood frozen, hands still raised in mid-gesture. A technician sprinted down the aisle, whispering into his earpiece. "We've lost everything. Internal servers, AI nodes, external APIs, everything's offline." "Impossible," someone muttered behind the control station. Marcus lowered his hand. The color drained from his face as the room, once a showcase of perfection, dissolved into confusion and whispers. He leaned toward his chief technology officer, Rachel Glass. "Is this a glitch?" Rachel shook her head slowly. "It's not a glitch. It's deliberate. This is a breach." Panic swept the room like a silent wave. In the far corner, a man in blue overalls and worn work boots clutched a mop, paused mid-swipe. His badge read Darnell Carter, Facilities Night Team. He wasn't supposed to be there during a VIP showcase, but he'd been called to clean a spill in the executive restroom. Now frozen among suits and brass, Darnell watched as tension crackled like static. Back near the front, the investors grew restless. A Pentagon official stood up sharply. Was that real-time access to classified simulations? Marcus nodded stiffly. The man turned to his aide. "Pull the plug. We're not funding a vulnerability." At that, the room erupted, voices clashing, phones ringing, panic intensifying. Someone shouted, "Stocks are dropping. Viridian Tech just lost $7 per share in under 90 seconds. Across the giant screen, now rebooting into a basic operating system, a message appeared in red bold type. "If you can't see the bias, you shouldn't hold the power." Gasps filled the room. Marcus's jaw tightened. "That's not from our system." Rachel glanced at the code spilling beneath the message. Her face went pale. "It's a backdoor. Someone's been inside for months. This wasn't just sabotage. This was a statement." And then, the quiet racism that had always loomed beneath Viridian Tech's surface began to rise. Marcus scanned the room. Not at the tech team, not at the executives. His eyes settled, subtly but unmistakably, on the small cluster of custodial staff who had gathered near the side doors to see what the commotion was about. Darnell felt it, not just the CEO's gaze, but the room's shifting tension. He wasn't new to it. That suspicion, that quiet, wordless accusation, "You don't belong here, so you must be the problem." His knuckles clenched around the mop handle. At that moment, one of the young assistants, a thin, sharp-faced intern named Nolan, made an offhand comment too loud to ignore. Maybe if the janitors weren't snooping around the server rooms at night. The sentence trailed off, but the damage was done. Rachel glared at Nolan, but Marcus said nothing. He didn't correct it. In the shadows, Darnell turned away slowly. From the back hallway, unseen by nearly everyone, a side door creaked open. A boy, no more than 14, stepped through. His hoodie was 2 sizes too big. His sneakers had holes. He wore a tattered backpack covered in math-themed patches. It was Elijah Carter, Darnell's son. He wasn't supposed to be there. School was closed due to heat outages, and Darnell couldn't leave him home alone. The two had agreed he'd sit quietly in the janitor's break room until Darnell finished cleaning the executive floor. But Elijah had wandered. Curiosity always pulled him toward machines, and now he stood silently in the back corridor, watching the chaos unfold. His eyes locked onto the code flashing on the mainframe screen, and unlike everyone else in the room, he understood what he was looking at. Elijah tilted his head slightly, squinting. The sequences weren't random. They were patterned, familiar, like fingerprints left by someone who didn't know they were being watched. He whispered to himself, almost reverently, "This isn't just a crash. It's a message, and I think I've seen this code before." The screen shifted again. More corrupted data. A second message blinked to life. "You profited from our erasure. Now you'll see us." A technician gasped. Rachel backed away from the console. Marcus clenched his fists. "We need to shut this whole thing down. Rip the servers if you have to. I want every floor searched." Security guards began moving toward the exits, but Elijah didn't move. He slipped behind a column, out of sight. He pulled a battered laptop from his backpack. The screen cracked, a corner of the casing missing. He flipped it open, booted into a custom-coded OS he built himself at the community center lab. And as the storm of Viridian Tech's undoing raged all around him, Elijah Carter, Janitor's son, overlooked genius, self-taught coder, began to type, line by line, quietly, eyes wide, heart racing. Elijah paused, staring at the cascading data. He mumbled under his breath, "I know who did this, and I think I can stop it." The hum of fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly as Elijah crouched behind a marble column, heart hammering like an unsteady drumbeat in his chest. The chaos inside Viridian Tech's gleaming auditorium played out like a stage show for giants, each executive and security officer pacing and shouting with authority Elijah had never been allowed to hold. But here, tucked in the seams of their crumbling empire, he felt something stirring inside him, not fear but instinct. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not on the executive floor. Not during a government pitch. Not even in the building until nightfall. But danger had a way of rewriting the rules. That morning, Darnell Carter had picked Elijah up from the church community center before sunrise. The boy had spent the night coding at a public lab that closed at 5 a.m., and Darnell didn't trust him to walk home alone through their neighborhood, in South Oakland, where gunshots weren't distant sounds, but midnight punctuation. "Stay in the janitor's break room," Darnell had said, ruffling his son's hair, eyes heavy with sleep, but voice firm. "No wandering, lad. These people, they see us. They don't see us. You understand?" Elijah had nodded. He always did. But the moment his father disappeared into the stairwell, the noise from the upper floors drew him upward like a magnet. Now, tucked away behind luxury stonework and the legs of suited power brokers, Elijah opened the cracked lid of his battered laptop. The screen flickered, dim and scratched from years of abuse. Missing keys were replaced with glued-in buttons from a toy keyboard he'd salvaged. The enter key was held in place with electrical tape, and yet it worked. Elijah's fingers danced over the broken letters, swift and sure. He wasn't guessing. He was watching. He didn't fully understand the infrastructure at Viridian Tech, but the language on the giant screen, the corrupted code, the naming conventions, the logic traps, looked eerily familiar. 3 weeks ago, he'd stumbled into a hidden chat thread on a dead hacker forum, a subchannel no longer indexed by Google. The thread was called Ghost Map, Folding the Grid. Most people would have closed it immediately. It looked like a bunch of encrypted nonsense. But Elijah saw more. In that jungle of commands and comments, someone had been bragging about creating a racial obfuscation protocol, code that filtered users by inferred ethnicity using language processing and biometric cues. They'd called it Sifter. Elijah had saved the thread, printed every line of code, studied it like scripture. Now he was looking at that same fingerprint, nested in Viridian Tech's server code, fractal and invisible unless you knew what to look for. A chill ran down his spine. They hadn't just been building surveillance. They were building discriminatory surveillance. The AI wasn't colorblind. It was color-coded. Elijah moved quickly, plugging in his USB drive, a homemade boot device with tools no IT department would take seriously. Programs he built from scraps at the community center, late nights alone with YouTube tutorials and half-working Chromebooks. The server room was through the west hallway. He remembered because he'd seen the blueprints accidentally left on a cleaning cart last week. With his backpack zipped and laptop pressed to his chest, Elijah slipped past the side exit like a shadow. No one noticed. Their eyes were locked on failing screens and angry investors. His footsteps were silent over the carpeted hallway. At the end of the corridor stood the server room door. Heavy, reinforced, access-controlled, but Elijah wasn't aiming for the obvious entrance. He crouched beside the utility panel, lifted it gently, and revealed the old maintenance conduit behind the wall, just wide enough for a skinny kid with determination. Inside, wires brushed against his jacket. It smelled of dust and ozone. As he crawled, a memory clawed at him. Flashback 2 years ago. Elijah sat in the back of Mr. Riley's office, the IT director at Greenbridge Middle School. His hands trembled as he explained how he'd jailbroken the school's learning tablets to fix a faulty reading app. Riley stared at him like he was a virus. "Kid," he'd said, folding his hands. "I don't care if you're smart. People like you don't belong in Silicon Valley. You might build something dangerous without even knowing it. That's what your kind always does." He never forgot those words. Now, elbow deep in fiber cable and silence, Elijah shoved the memory down and focused. He reached the server room's inner panel, a loose maintenance flap, probably forgotten. He pushed it open. He was in. The room buzzed with chilled air. Towers of blinking machines lined the walls. Most of the lights were red. The central terminal stood on a floating desk, untouched amid the chaos. He plugged in his laptop. The system fought back, encrypted walls, admin protocols, but Elijah had seen worse. His fingers moved like thunder. Command lines blinked in and out. Every file he accessed revealed more of the sifter protocol, layers of bias embedded not just in facial recognition but in risk detection, movement profiling, voice cadence. The AI was flagging users not for behavior, but for sounding too urban, walking too erratically, wearing unverified clothing patterns. It wasn't predictive policing. It was digital profiling, automated racism at industrial scale. And now the system had short-circuited. Someone, either a whistleblower or a rogue hacker, had reversed the sifter logic and weaponized it back onto Viridian tech. Elijah paused. His hands trembled. He wasn't just in over his head. He was neck-deep in something that could destroy him. But he didn't stop. Because somewhere out there, some little kid just like him, wearing second-hand sneakers, carrying a cheap backpack, would be labeled a threat before they even had a chance. And that made Elijah furious. His eyes narrowed. He began drafting a patch to contain the breach, not to save Viridian tech, but to isolate the sifter protocol, to show the world exactly what this company had built. The door creaked open behind him. Elijah froze. Footsteps. Heavy. Security boots. He grabbed his laptop, slid behind the largest server rack, and held his breath. The security guard peered inside, looked around, muttered into his radio. Nothing. Must have been one of the programmers sneaking back in. Place is a madhouse. He left. Elijah waited 15 seconds, then emerged, pale but focused. His code was running. His patch nearly built. A blinking prompt appeared. Source confirmed. Protocol sifter activated. March 9, 2022. Architect M. Devlin. His eyes widened. Marcus Devlin hadn't just funded this tech. He'd designed the racist protocol himself. Elijah stared at the terminal and whispered. He knew. He built it this way, on purpose. The hum of the server room was no longer a backdrop. It was a heartbeat, a digital pulse that rose and fell with every keystroke Elijah made. His hands hovered above his cracked keyboard, now slick with sweat. The deeper he dug into Viridian Tech's infrastructure, the more grotesque the revelations became. What started as fragmented traces of strange logic pathways now revealed a full-blown system of intentional bias. Not by accident, not a bug, but a design. A strategic, calculated layer of racial filtration, buried beneath a labyrinth of code. So deep, even most engineers at Viridian wouldn't have known where to look. It wasn't just Sifter. It was a firewall, a digital gatekeeper, programmed to detect linguistic patterns, surnames, and behavioral data commonly associated with Black, Latino, and other minority communities, and quietly delete them. Elijah sat stunned as he read the log entries. Lines like flag, urban accented speech pattern, deprioritize voice authentication, match, surname frequency map, reduce creditworthiness score, behavioral profile, erratic walking style, increase risk level. The system had begun to eat itself alive. The very protocols designed to erase undesirable data had now backfired, deleting foundational files, corrupting admin credentials, and short-circuiting Viridian's central control. The AI wasn't just broken, it was rebelling. And still none of the adults upstairs knew why. Elijah pulled every log he could find into a zip file, encrypted it, and saved it to 3 different hidden locations online. Then he printed out 4 lines of proof in plain English, showing exactly what the firewall had been coded to do. He knew his father wouldn't understand the technical details, but he also knew Darnell Carter had one thing going for him that Elijah didn't: the right to be in that building. He raced back through the vent shaft, laptop wedged under one arm. He crawled past tangled wires and the scent of disinfectant until he reached the hallway again. From there, everything moved too fast. Security had begun locking down floors. Executives were shouting. Tech teams scrambled like ants beneath falling debris. Elijah spotted his father near the vending machine, head down, quietly mopping spilled coffee. "Dad," he whispered, "you need to take this to the execs. Now. It explains everything." Darnell looked down at the printout, then back at Elijah. "What is this?" "The code. It's not just a breach, it's revenge. The system was built to erase black and brown data. It's breaking because someone flipped it on them." Darnell's eyes widened, but he didn't ask questions. He knew his son. When Elijah spoke with that low, clipped voice, the one where he dropped every unnecessary word, he meant business. "Stay here," Darnell said, tucking the paper into his back pocket and gripping Elijah's shoulder. "And for God's sake, don't let anyone see that laptop." Elijah watched as his father climbed the executive floor. Inside the boardroom, whiteboards covered in frantic diagrams were being updated every second. Rachel Glass was drawing network topologies, while Marcus paced back and forth with a phone pressed to his ear, speaking in hushed, venomous tones. As Darnell entered, the chatter dulled. He stood out. He always had. Blue uniform, brown skin, old sneakers. Marcus turned slowly. "Can I help you?" Darnell pulled out the folded paper. "My son found something in your system. Something you all clearly missed." A thin man near the whiteboard, Grant Becker, head of software architecture, snorted. "What son?" Darnell said nothing. He just extended the page. Marcus didn't take it. Rachel did. She read the printout, her expression tightening with each line. The room grew quiet again. "This can't be real," she whispered. "This would mean that your system is racially profiling users," Darnell said. "On purpose." Grant scoffed. "Hold on. Are we seriously listening to a janitor try to diagnose a cyber attack?" "It's not my diagnosis," Darnell said. "It's my son's." "Elijah." Another engineer laughed. "You're telling me the answer to a multi-billion-dollar AI breach came from some random kid with a mop?" The room exploded in sneers and side comments. Marcus folded his arms. "We don't take cybersecurity advice from janitors' kids. This isn't a daycare, it's a defense-grade tech operation." Darnell's face flushed, but he stood tall. "That janitor's kid cracked your system in under an hour." Rachel looked back at the page. "The logic here, it's disturbingly consistent with our back-end architecture. I've seen these parameters before. We scrubbed them during early builds, I thought." "You thought," Darnell echoed, his voice bitter now. "Maybe you just looked the other way." Grant stepped forward. "Security." 2 men in suits appeared almost instantly. "Escort Mr. Carter off this floor." Darnell's jaw clenched. He took a slow breath. "Tell Marcus the next generation isn't cleaning up his mess anymore." The guards pushed him gently toward the exit. Marcus didn't look up. He was already back on his phone. Downstairs, Elijah saw the disappointment etched into his father's face before Darnell even spoke. "I tried," Darnell said quietly. "They don't want the truth, son. They want control." Elijah didn't say anything for a long time. He just stared at the polished floors, the ones his father had spent 20 years cleaning. Then, without speaking, he opened his laptop, pulled up the files, zipped the logs again, compressed the printout, attached the screenshots. He hovered over a contact, the real whistleblower. An encrypted anonymous Dropbox Elijah had used once to leak discriminatory school data that led to Greenbridge High's principal being reassigned. This would be different. This was nuclear. He hesitated. Darnell looked over. What is it? Elijah's voice was calm. This is bigger than them, Dad. Bigger than us. If we don't share this, they'll bury it. Just like everything else. Then he clicked send. The screen blinked once. Message delivered. Elijah leaned back against the hallway wall, shoulders trembling under the weight of it all. But deep inside, something shifted. For the first time, he wasn't hiding behind code. He was using it to speak. 30 minutes later, Viridian Tech's firewalls detected an inbound traffic surge. Not a breach. Not an attack. A viral upload. They built the AI to erase us, and now it's turning on them. Anonymous whistleblower. Files on Sifter leak. By the time the sun peeked over the Oakland skyline, the entire tech world had heard of the janitor's kid. It started with one post, a single file, uploaded anonymously, that unraveled the invisible scaffolding beneath Viridian Tech's pristine AI empire. The Sifter Leak 001. The screenshots. The logs. The proof that racial bias wasn't a glitch. It was a feature. And then came the name. Elijah Carter. It was traced not through arrogance, but through impact. Within 6 hours, over 3.2 million downloads of the leak had been recorded. By breakfast, social media was ablaze with one phrase, Janitor Kid. It wasn't just a story anymore. It was a movement. Across TikTok, black and brown creators stitched together heartbreaking videos of moments they'd once brushed off. Job applications that were auto-rejected despite meeting all criteria, facial recognition failing at airport kiosks, credit applications frozen with no reason. A Latina college student posted a video titled, "This AI flagged me as a movement anomaly, walking home from dance class." It hit 12 million views in 2 hours. A Black Army veteran posted another, "They arrested me at a protest, said I was tagged as socially volatile by a predictive system. I never knew it was this." Elijah watched in silence as the world responded. He didn't bask in it. He wasn't built for that. He just sat on the floor of the small apartment he shared with his father, his laptop resting on a stack of textbooks, and scrolled through it all with wide, stunned eyes. Darnell sat beside him, jaw tight. "You did this?" he asked softly. Elijah nodded. "They were erasing people like us. Digitally. Silently. I couldn't let it keep happening." Across town, inside a corporate conference room, with panoramic views of San Francisco Bay, Viridian Tech's board of directors scrambled for damage control. Rachel Glass stood at the head of the table, holding a printed version of the leak. "This is bad," she said plainly. "And if we don't handle it honestly, it'll get worse." A board member, Dalton Price, a venture capitalist with a ski resort grin and a trust fund ego, laughed dismissively. "It's a PR storm. We ride it out. We'll say it was misconfigured. Blame foreign cyber sabotage. China, maybe." Rachel shook her head. "This leak is precise. It references internal code that only we would know. You think some foreign hacker wrote lines that sound exactly like the test versions we prototyped into it?" Another exec leaned forward. "Are you saying the kid actually accessed our architecture?" Dalton snorted. "He's a janitor's kid. Probably read some old logs and got lucky." Rachel's voice sharpened. "You didn't read the logs, Dalton. He built a patch that isolated our bias structure in under an hour. Our own engineers couldn't even replicate it until they followed his syntax." A long silence settled over the room. Then Marcus entered. He looked tired, thinner. He'd barely slept since the crash. He didn't greet anyone. He walked straight to the projector and loaded a presentation. On screen appeared his favorite college photo. Himself at 22, grinning beside a banner that read Phi Belisarius Code the Future. Every face in the picture was white. Marcus clicked forward. The slide changed to his original pitch deck from 2015. The one that landed him Viridian Tech's first $20 million round. Slide 2 read, "The world is chaos. We will teach it order." He paused. "Let it hang. I built this company with one promise," he said. "To create something smarter than prejudice. Something cleaner than human judgment." Then his voice lowered. "But maybe I just rebuilt the same old walls in better code." Nobody responded. He turned off the projector and walked out. Back in Elijah's apartment, a ding broke the silence. An email. Subject line: I believe you. Let's talk. It was from Renata Shaw. Elijah clicked, unsure what to expect. Elijah: I'm a venture capitalist. I funded Viridian Tech once, and then walked away when I saw the bias inside. You're not just right. You're brave. I'd like to meet. You deserve support and protection, but you also deserve to understand the game you just stepped into. Call me. Don't wait too long. Attached was a business card. Renata Shaw, founder, Echelon Rise Capital. Elijah turned to his dad. Should I trust her? Darnell paused. Read her email again. She didn't say she could fix it. She said you deserve to understand the game. Elijah thought about that. He didn't want fame. He didn't need praise. But maybe what he needed now was education. Not the kind they gave you in public schools with broken chairs and outdated history books. The kind that showed you where the walls were, who built them, and how to tear them down. As Elijah stared at the email, a news alert popped up on his screen. Breaking. Viridian Tech denies allegations of algorithmic bias, calls Sifter protocol a technical misconfiguration. But below it, a second alert hit harder. New leak. Thousands of internal Viridian emails surface, revealing racial coding directives signed by M. Devlin himself. Renata Shaw's office was everything Elijah imagined power would look like. Floor-to-ceiling glass, no desk clutter, and books that hadn't just been bought to impress people. She stood in front of the window, hands clasped behind her back, staring out at the San Francisco skyline as the boy stepped into her world. Her voice was smooth, but sharp-edged like broken glass. You picked one hell of a fight, Elijah. He said nothing, clutching his fraying backpack to his chest. Darnell had insisted on coming, but waited in the lobby, pacing like a father unsure whether to be proud or terrified. Renata turned. She was tall, mid-40s with silver-threaded locks, and eyes that didn't blink unless they had to. Most kids spend their weekends dodging homework, she said. You apparently spent yours gutting a billion-dollar defense contractor. I wasn't trying to start anything, Elijah mumbled. Renata laughed once, dry, but not mocking. Kid, that's the thing. You didn't start it. You just exposed it. The fire was already burning. You just pulled the curtain back. She gestured to the couch. Elijah sat. She didn't. I know Viridian, she said. I was their earliest Series A backer in 2016. Wrote them their first real check. Thought I was funding the future. Elijah looked up. So why'd you leave? Renata's expression darkened. She walked to a locked cabinet, pulled out a thin folder, and placed it on the coffee table. Inside were printed emails, old, grainy, but legible. Subject lines like, adjust facial rec bias threshold. We can't afford to flag too many suburban subjects. Revise inner city weight. Create linguistic filters. Drop slang match rates by 60. These were from a beta test I saw in 2017, Renata said. I flagged it. Marcus told me it was just a placeholder model. Said they'd diversify it later. I pulled my money the next morning. Elijah flipped through the pages. A cold weight settling in his chest. Renata sat across from him now, more direct. Listen to me carefully. You embarrassed very powerful people. You broke their image. They'll try to turn you into the problem. Elijah's voice was barely audible. I already feel it. The way they looked at my dad, like we were stealing something just by breathing. Renata nodded. They'll hit you where they think it hurts most. Not in court, but in character. And she was right. While Elijah sat in that high-rise office, downtown Viridian Tech executives were already drafting a plan. Marcus had hired a corporate intelligence firm, the kind that didn't show up on LinkedIn. In a sealed room, 3 white men and a South Asian data analyst combed through every trace of Elijah Carter's digital life. They pulled eviction notices from when he was 6, found a video from a middle school suspension for hacking a test scoring machine. They dredged up Darnell's old parole paperwork from a bar fight 20 years ago. It wasn't about truth. It was about mud. The headlines began within 24 hours. Troubled teen claims system sabotage, Viridian insider, or just lucky hacker. Janitor's son tied to local vandalism and experts question validity of Sifter leak. The stories never quoted Elijah. They just hinted, suggested, cast shadows. One segment even aired footage of Darnell being handcuffed during a tenant protest, framing it like a criminal takedown. Elijah watched it all unfold from his bedroom. No more cheering tweets. No more interviews. Just silence. Then mockery. He slumped against the wall, overwhelmed. Maybe I should have just shut up. Renata called the next morning. Don't ever say that again, she snapped. They want you invisible. Your voice scared them because it was real. Stay loud, Elijah. But he didn't feel loud anymore. He felt exhausted. He logged into his email out of habit, just to clear the clutter. That's when he saw it. No subject line, no sender name, just a single line in the message body. You're right, and I have proof. Attached was an audio file. Elijah hesitated, then hit play. The voice was familiar. Clipped, measured. Marcus Devlin. We don't need urban data, slowing the algorithm. The military wants reliability, not diversity. Just clean up the outputs, and make sure no one outside R&D sees the filter logs. Another voice, possibly Grant Becker, replied, We'll rename the racial flags to something innocuous. No one reads the metadata anyway. The recording ended. Elijah's breath caught in his throat. He read the message again, then noticed a file name in the attachment title. Sifter log M. Devlin June 17 meeting Doive.
It was real.
It wasn't just bias embedded in code. It was intentional. Directed. Known. A second email popped in. This one signed, Eva Lynn, former Viridian developer. I've got more. But we'll need to move fast. They're scrubbing everything. Elijah stared at the email chain, palms sweating. Then a notification blinked on his screen. System alert. External IP address attempting to access your private cloud storage. Someone was already trying to erase the proof. Elijah stared at the screen, the warning about a remote IP flickering like a heartbeat. The audio file from the anonymous sender still echoed in his mind. Marcus's voice, calm and calculated, openly approving the manipulation of data to exclude marginalized users. The system wasn't rogue, it wasn't misconfigured, it was obedient. And the person trying to erase the proof now was most likely someone who'd built it. His inbox pinged again. One new message. From Ava Lynn. Subject. Meet me tonight. 7 p.m. Same building. Sub-level 2. Use the freight elevator. Don't be late. The message was unsigned. But Elijah didn't hesitate. He knew the stakes. That night, the Viridian Tech campus was almost ghostly. Security had doubled since the leaks, but the place still throbbed with panic. Eva Lynn had worked for the company's architecture team for 4 years. She was quiet, methodical, and according to the few tech forums Elijah trusted, the only person inside Viridian who had ever pushed back on the AI's core assumptions. Elijah slipped into the loading dock entrance as instructed, hoodie drawn tight. His father had begged him not to go. This is grown folks' warfare, Lige, Darnell said, standing barefoot in their tiny kitchen. They don't fight fair, they don't fight clean. They fight rich. Elijah only replied, That's why we don't wait. Sub-level 2 wasn't lit. A single bulb buzzed above the freight elevator's exit. The hallway smelled of dust and machine oil. She was already waiting. Ava Lynn was in her 30s. Slim, glasses reflecting the dim light. Her posture more like a fighter than a coder. She didn't extend her hand. She just nodded. You brought the drive? Elijah handed her the USB, his encrypted backup copy of the sifter logs, and the leaked audio. She plugged it into a secured laptop on a crate beside her. The screen glowed with lines of code already parsed and indexed. Ava spoke with no introduction. They told me to drop it. I didn't, so they buried me. Elijah nodded slowly. I figured it was someone on the inside. You knew the system too well. She didn't look up. They moved me to quality control. After I flagged early bias parameters in the sifter build, told me I was being too sensitive. Then they took my clearance. Said I wasn't aligned with the product vision. Elijah watched her fingers move quickly, typing into a console. Then she paused, turned the screen so he could see. This, she said quietly, is the real foundation. The screen displayed a file directory, hidden behind layers of false folders, firewalls, masquerading as system backups. The title of the key protocol file made Elijah's blood chill. Redline prototype R7 final. Ava opened the file. What they saw wasn't just code. It was social engineering. Algorithms trained to map city blocks, analyze surnames, link linguistic patterns to criminal probability scores, all bundled under a deceptively vague framework called community risk stratification. In plain terms, Redline was an AI-powered redlining machine. Deprioritize requests from zones with high ethnic density. Limit predictive support services in urban registries. Redirect alerts based on last name frequency and tonal speech variances. Elijah's mouth went dry. They built digital segregation. Ava nodded. And it's being licensed to school districts, hospitals, even insurance companies. They call it operational triage. He took a shaky breath. We have to release it. Everything. Publicly. Eva's eyes met his. You realize that once we do this, your life changes. Not just headlines. Not just trolls. You'll be hated in places that pretend to be neutral. This industry protects itself. They'll blacklist you before you are old enough to apply to college. Elijah stared at the lines of code again. I'd rather be shut out than shut up. Ava smiled for the first time, the kind of smile that wasn't soft but proud. Good, she said. Because I've been waiting a long time for someone outside these walls to care enough to burn the whole thing down. Together they began building a full disclosure package, not just the sifter logs and the red line protocol, but Ava's internal emails, company memos, voice notes from engineering meetings. Every file was time-stamped. Every change tracked. Every racist directive connected to a decision-maker. The room grew colder. Outside, the building creaked as if under the weight of its secrets. Elijah whispered, "What if we don't finish this in time?" Eva didn't blink. "Then we make sure someone else does." They saved the archive in 4 separate cloud locations. They printed hard copies. They encrypted duplicates to be sent automatically if either of their email accounts were disabled. As they prepared to upload the report, Eva hesitated. "There's one thing missing." She pulled up a terminal. Began typing. "What are you doing?" Elijah asked. "Leaving a signature," she said. "So they never get to say it was just another system error." She appended a closing note to the report. "Built by men who erased us. Uncovered by the people they tried to delete." Then she hit upload. The system whirred. The file was live. The clock had started. As Elijah left the sublevel, his mind swirled. He had done more in a week than most people did in years. But it wasn't over. It was never going to be over. He stepped out into the chilly night air, pulling his hoodie tighter. He could feel the weight of history shifting beneath his feet. Heavy, dangerous, necessary. But just as he reached the sidewalk near Viridian Tech's front entrance, a voice shouted, "Sir, step away from the building." 2 private security guards rushed towards someone. Elijah turned. His stomach dropped. It was his father. Darnell stood beside a janitor cart, keys in hand, wearing his work uniform. "I work here," he was saying, calm but confused. "My shift doesn't start till midnight. But my son—" "Step away," the guard barked again. Then one snapped a zip tie around his wrists. A police cruiser pulled up silently. Elijah ran forward. Panicked. "What are you doing?" "He works here." One guard glared back. "He's trespassing. Unauthorized presence during restricted corporate hours." Elijah shouted, "He's my dad." The officers didn't look at him. Darnell, now cuffed and confused, looked Elijah in the eye and asked, "What did we just uncover that scared them this much?" The air in the interrogation room was dry and still, the kind of stillness that made every breath feel suspicious. Elijah sat across from 2 federal agents, his knees bouncing under the metal table. But there were no handcuffs, no accusation, just silence, and 2 pairs of eyes studying him like he was a blueprint they couldn't yet decode. Agent Whitaker, the older of the 2, finally spoke. "You're not in trouble, Elijah. You're the reason we caught what we did." Elijah blinked. "Then, why am I here?" Whitaker leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "Because the Pentagon wants answers. And they think you might be the only person who can give them in plain English." The younger agent, Morales, slid a thick file across the table. Inside were pages of internal Viridian Tech documents, technical memos, redacted contracts, military correspondences, some stamped with confidential, others still dripping with implication. Morales added, "We've been watching Viridian for a while, but what you leaked opened a door none of us expected. The sifter system, the red line protocol. The implications aren't just domestic. This tech's already being quietly tested in overseas surveillance programs." Elijah's eyes widened. "They're using it." Whitaker nodded. "In war zones, refugee screening, even disaster response. People are being labeled non-priority based on how they look, how they speak, just like here." Elijah's throat tightened. This wasn't just about tech anymore. It was about how fast discrimination could be institutionalized once it was coded into machinery and exported as efficiency. Morales added, "The Pentagon's trying to get ahead of this before the public fallout reaches them." They've authorized a full independent review of Viridian tech, but they need someone who understands what was buried in the code, not just the headlines. Elijah leaned back, stunned. You want me to consult? Whitaker chuckled. Technically, we'd call you a civilian analyst under cooperative review. But yes, we want your help. The gravity of it settled on Elijah like cold water. Just days ago, he was being ignored in the hallway. Now, government agents wanted his insight. Because he didn't just expose racism, he documented it in a language no one else had dared translate. But Elijah didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared down at the folder. I won't do it unless Ava Lynn is protected. She's the one who gave me access. She's still inside their system. She's the real whistleblower. Morales exchanged a glance with Whitaker. She's not in our custody, Whitaker admitted. We've been trying to contact her. She stopped responding 2 nights ago. Elijah's heart dropped. She wouldn't just go quiet, he said. We had backup plans. Encrypted contacts. She said if anything went wrong, she'd send a dead man's ping to my account. Morales tapped on a tablet, scrolling quickly. Nothing's come through. She's not at her residence either. Her badge hasn't been used since the night of the upload. Panic coiled in Elijah's chest. He grabbed his laptop from his backpack and opened his encrypted app. His fingers moved faster than they ever had, decrypting Ava's private server pathways, checking dormant backup signals. Nothing. Then finally, an alert. A single red dot. Ava's last known digital location. Not her home. Not the Viridian Tech headquarters. It pinged from a corporate-owned warehouse on the outskirts of Alameda. Elijah stood. We need to go there. Now. Whitaker raised a brow. That's outside of our immediate jurisdiction, unless we have proof of a federal crime occurring on the premises. She is the proof, Elijah said, his voice sharp. And if she's gone, the rest of her files might go with her. The agents hesitated. Then Whitaker pulled out his phone. Get me authorization for a field sweep of Viridian's secondary data sites. We may have a human rights breach. Meanwhile, inside a private room overlooking the Pacific, Marcus Devlin sipped from a glass of scotch and stared at the live analytics streaming across a wall-sized screen. His digital reputation team was suppressing keywords, rerouting tags, drowning Reddit threads in noise. But the redline leak had caused too deep a rupture, and now the government had gotten involved. He swiveled in his chair and looked toward the tall man in the corner. Julian Pace, a contractor liaison, who operated in the gaps between federal contracts and private agendas. You said you'd slow them down, Marcus growled. Julian adjusted his tie. The military wants to keep the tech viable. If the kids' findings go public, you'll be replaced. They'll just rebrand the platform and repitch it as humanitarian. Marcus scoffed. And what about the internal protocols we buried? Julian stepped forward. That's why we took care of your little Ava Lynn problem. Marcus paused mid-sip.
What do you mean, took care of?
Julian didn't answer. He just turned and left. Hours later, at the edge of a half-empty industrial district in Alameda, 3 black SUVs pulled up to a seemingly abandoned warehouse. Inside, darkness. Old servers humming faintly, stacks of outdated tech equipment, and a thick sense of something left unfinished. Elijah stepped in behind the agents, every nerve in his body on high alert. They found her in the back, unconscious but alive. Ava Lynn duct-taped to a chair, laptop smashed beside her, bruises forming along her jaw. A small white device still blinked beside her head, a signal scrambler jamming all outgoing transmissions. Elijah ran to her side. She's breathing, Morales confirmed, checking her pulse. But barely. We need medical now. As EMTs loaded Ava into an ambulance, Elijah stared at the smashed laptop. Whatever was on it had been the last piece. The final hammer to bring Viridian Tech to its knees. Whitaker placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder. You still with us, kid? Elijah looked at him, rage and purpose boiling behind his eyes. I'm not done until everyone sees what they buried. Back inside the SUV, Elijah checked his cloud archive and found a chilling message had replaced the redline upload. Access denied. File restricted. Permanent hold. By federal request. The image hit the morning news cycle before the sun even broke the horizon. A black man in a faded janitor's uniform tackled outside a glass tower. A mop bucket clattering across the sidewalk, hands zip-tied behind his back. His face strained in confusion and pain, pressed against the concrete. Across the bottom of the screen scrolled the headline. Security incident at Viridian Tech headquarters. Former custodian detained. But social media told a different story. By noon, the hashtags had already taken off. Mopping while black. Justice for Darnell.
Janitor kid. Digital gym cry.
The video, taken by a passing delivery driver, showed everything. Darnell had been quiet, calm, no yelling, no resisting. The security guards had approached, asked a few curt questions, then restrained him without cause. He was arrested for trespassing at the building where he'd cleaned toilets for 14 years. That single clip sent the nation into uproar. Civil rights groups mobilized overnight. Attorneys from the Southern Coalition for Algorithmic Justice issued statements comparing Veridian Tech's internal practices to the housing redlining maps of the 1960s. Except now the maps were digital, the boundaries invisible, the damage automated. News panels filled with legal scholars and data scientists explaining how Elijah's redline leak had confirmed what black and brown communities had long felt, but couldn't prove, that the systems weren't broken. They were working exactly as designed. Elijah watched all of it unfold from the waiting room of a downtown law office, a space too clean and too quiet. His father sat beside him, fresh out on bail, rubbing the bruises on his wrists. "I was holding a mop, man," Darnell said quietly. "They looked at me like I had a weapon." Elijah didn't respond. He couldn't. The guilt swirled in his chest like a storm. "You didn't do this," Darnell added, as if reading his thoughts. "You exposed it. That's different." But that didn't make it hurt less. It had all happened so fast. One day, Elijah was a kid with a broken laptop, and too many questions. Now he was the face of a national reckoning. Renata called that evening. Her voice was urgent. "Morning shows are reaching out. You've got a 7 a.m. slot on Good Morning America. If you want it, they want your side." Elijah paused. "Do they really?" "They want the clicks. But the people want your voice," she said. "And if you don't show up, they'll let someone else speak for you." Elijah agreed. Quietly. At 6:40 the next morning, he sat in a makeup chair in a midtown Manhattan studio, the city outside still wrapped in dawn mist. A producer asked him gently to tone down any accusations and stick to your experience. He said nothing. When the cameras rolled, the host greeted him like a novelty, a smile too big, a tone too bright. "Elijah Carter, the 14-year-old behind the leak that's shaking the tech world. Welcome," he nodded politely. "You've become an internet sensation, the janitor kid, taking on Silicon Valley. What's that been like?" Elijah stared at the camera for a beat too long, then spoke softly. "My mom used to say, 'They'll make you invisible, son. Make them see.'" The room went still. Even the makeup assistant in the corner lowered her brush. Elijah continued. "They made my dad invisible. He cleaned their building for a decade. Never missed a day. And they tackled him like he was dangerous. Like just being there was a threat." The host's smile faded. "They built systems that pretend to be neutral," Elijah said, voice rising. "But the bias isn't in the machine. It's in the mirror. It's in who gets seen as a risk, who gets flagged, who gets erased." A producer tried to signal a wrap. The host forced a smile. "Powerful words, Elijah. Thank you." He cut her off. "You asked me what it's like. It's like being a problem before you've even done anything." The segment ended, but the internet began. Clips from the show flooded timelines. Memes, reposts, think pieces. Everyone had an opinion, and despite the usual trolls and paid hit pieces flooding comment sections, the core truth hit home for millions. Elijah Carter wasn't just a teen hacker. He was a mirror, and what he reflected made the industry squirm. But behind the screens, the damage control was in full swing. Marcus Devlin, sitting in a penthouse war room with lawyers and crisis PR agents, slammed his hand against a table. "Shut it down, flood the sponsors with complaints, threaten the networks. I want that segment discredited by end of day." His team obeyed. By mid-afternoon, anonymous emails began pouring into Good Morning America's advertisers. Hundreds of identical complaints. Dangerous narrative. Anti-tech. Bad influence on children. But the producers didn't pull the clip. They doubled down. They invited civil rights leaders for a follow-up segment. Marcus was losing grip. And Elijah? He was back at school. Sort of. He walked the hallways like a ghost. Students parting like waves. Some whispered. Some stared. One kid muttered, "Yo, that's the dude who nuked Veridian." Teachers treated him like he was radioactive, unsure if they should celebrate him or avoid him. In the middle of math class, the intercom crackled. "Elijah Carter, please report to the front office. Immediately." He packed his bag slowly, pulse quickening. When he reached the lobby, two men in dark suits stood by the desk, not school staff. One flashed a badge. FBI. The secretary looked as stunned as Elijah. They didn't say what it's about, she whispered. Elijah stepped forward slowly. Is this about the Viridian case? One agent nodded. We need to talk. Privately. Your father's been notified. The hallway behind him filled with students pressing against the windows. Phones out. Whispers rising. Elijah Carter being pulled by feds? Yo, what did he find? But Elijah didn't shrink. He stood taller, like his mother had told him. Make them see you. As the agents led him down the hallway, Elijah asked, Is this about the leak? The older agent replied without looking back. No. It's about what we found inside the system after you opened the door. The chill from the SUV's air conditioning did nothing to quiet the heat boiling beneath Elijah's skin. He stared at the screen of his laptop, his hands clenched into fists beside the keyboard. Access denied. File restricted. Permanent hold. By federal request. They'd silenced the archive. The backup to the Redline protocol. The very files he and Ava had risked everything to secure. Gone. Or worse, locked up and used as leverage. Eva was barely conscious when they pulled her from the warehouse, her mouth too swollen to speak, her laptop in splinters at her feet. It was a message as much as it was an attack. You may have the truth, but you'll never control the narrative. Back at Renata's loft, a steel and glass fortress, nestled into the Oakland hills, Elijah sat with his cracked laptop on his knees, hunched over Ava's last known data trail. Her smartwatch had pinged a GPS signal 30 hours before she went dark. It wasn't random. Coordinates placed her near a Viridian tech asset, a gray, low-profile warehouse, registered under a shell company called Ozium Data Logistics. A dead name, no website, no history, but the address matched the one from Ava's ghost ping. Elijah, Renata said from the kitchen, pouring coffee like it was medicine. This is above our pay grade. You already gave the feds what they wanted. You did more than anyone ever expected of you. You don't have to go back in. Elijah didn't look up. If we stop now, they win. Renata walked over, crouched beside him. You're just a kid. No, he said, voice cold. I was a kid before they tackled my dad, before they erased Ava, before they buried what we found. I don't know what I am now, but I'm not going to sleep while the truth is locked away in someone's hard drive. There was silence between them, heavy but full of understanding. Renata stood. Then we do it smart. Not just brave. The next morning, a new leak hit the internet. Not from Elijah, not from Ava, not from any known whistleblower. A 2-minute internal Viridian tech training video appeared on a decentralized video sharing site. The title was nondescript, User Priority Matrix, Onboarding Module 3. But the contents were anything but forgettable. A white male presenter in a Viridian polo, standing in front of a corporate banner, spoke with a friendly tone. In this module, we'll walk through how the system evaluates user risk profiles based on region, surname analytics, and behavior markers. Remember, higher urban density areas often result in data noise, so deprioritization helps us streamline valid flagging. If a user's speech pattern includes excessive slang or unverified grammar, tag them for manual review only. A second instructor added, in cases where biometric scans return with facial ambiguity or ethnic overlay, reduce confidence scores. This prevents system overload from ambiguous classification. Then the words appeared on screen. Redline protocol, field overview. The video ended. America exploded. News anchors tried to play catch-up. Politicians fumbled to distance themselves from Viridian contracts. Twitter, TikTok, and Reddit were flooded with cries of digital redlining. Parents uploaded videos asking why their bilingual children couldn't access online portals. Public school IT directors demanded audits. Elijah watched it all unfold from Renata's balcony, the city below crackling with noise and unrest. His phone buzzed. Encrypted message. Ava's emergency server had logged a file retrieval timestamp exactly 1 hour before she was taken. She had uploaded something, even as they came for her. But it wasn't on her main drive. It was stored locally, offline. The warehouse. Elijah stood. We go tonight. Renata didn't hesitate. I'll drive. The warehouse at the edge of Alameda looked like any other shipping hub. Chain link fencing, cheap security lights, cracked pavement out front. But what made it dangerous wasn't how it looked. It was the silence. Inside, rows of abandoned servers hummed quietly. Empty coffee cups, folding chairs, a long-forgotten control center, stripped of anything overtly suspicious but humming with residual data. Elijah pulled out his modified tablet and began scanning for wireless footprints. His fingers were steady, but his mind raced with what-ifs. Then, a ping. Weak, faint, but familiar. Ava's encryption signature. He tracked it to a locked room at the far end. A keypad, retinal scanner. Renata handed him a toolkit. "Think you can get in?" "I think," he said, unslinging his backpack. They forgot how resourceful a janitor's kit has to be. 3 minutes, one bypassed circuit. A manual override of the relay board. Click. The door opened, and there she was. Ava Lynn, tied to a chair, unconscious, wrists bruised and lips split. Beside her, a pile of server hardware, scorched but intact, and taped to the side of one box. "Use this. If I don't make it, finish it." Elijah rushed to her side, feeling her pulse. Weak, but there. He looked at Renata. "Call it in." But before she could dial, the lights flickered. Once, then twice, then darkness. A faint humming restarted. The servers blinked back to life. Elijah turned to the terminal, his eyes narrowing. On the monitor, one line of text appeared. User recognized Elijah Carter. He stared at the cursor. Then the system loaded a file, auto-activated, hidden in Ava's offline drive. A live feed. From inside Viridian Tech's boardroom. Marcus Devlin, Grant Becker, Julian Pace, sitting calmly, speaking openly. "We let it leak," Marcus was saying, "so we could see who would run with it. Every whistleblower's been identified, including Ava." "And the boy?" Julian asked. Marcus smiled coldly. "He thinks he's exposing us, but he's cataloging everything we missed. The Pentagon doesn't want transparency. They want control, and thanks to him, we know exactly what public resistance looks like in real time." Elijah's breath caught. It was a trap. They'd let Ava leak the files, let Elijah expose them, all to study reaction patterns, voter sentiment, media cycles. He hadn't cracked the system. He'd been used by it. Ava groaned beside him, eyes fluttering. He knelt beside her, fury rising in his throat. "We're not done," he whispered. "Not even close." Elijah plugged in his last backup drive, but the system hijacked it instantly, flashing a new warning. Upload redreaded government mainer server active. The warehouse still smelled of ozone and burnt circuitry when Ava Lynn stirred for the first time in hours. Her breathing was uneven, shallow, like every inhale had to pass through barbed wire. Elijah knelt beside her, watching as her eyelids flickered against the harsh overhead light. "Ada," he whispered, voice soft but urgent. "Can you hear me?" Her lips parted. A small, cracked whisper emerged. "They knew." Then her hand shifted, trembling toward her jacket pocket. Elijah reached in gently and pulled out a small battered flash drive, wrapped in cloth and sealed with duct tape. She looked at him one last time and murmured, "If anything happens to me, give it to someone who can't be bought." Then her head slumped sideways, her body going limp. Renata rushed to check her pulse. "Still there, but she's fading. We need an ambulance, now." As Renata called 911, Elijah stared at the flash drive in his hand. It was warm, not just from her body heat, but from everything it held: years of emails, logs, transcripts, secrets no one had meant to survive. By the time paramedics loaded Ava into the ambulance and disappeared into the night, Elijah had already begun decrypting the files on his laptop in Renata's back seat. He knew better than to connect to the internet. He worked offline, inside a self-contained sandbox. And what he saw made his heart stop. An entire archive of internal emails, beginning as far back as 2016 between Marcus Devlin, Grant Becker, and several senior engineers. Thread after thread revealed a deliberate pattern, discussions about which zip codes were less politically volatile to suppress during beta testing. Warnings that AI language models were tagging Black and Latino speech as aggressive, followed by dismissals like "that's an acceptable false positive margin." Proposals to bury edge case risks in the name of government trust. And most damning of all, correspondence directly to a Department of Defense contractor. Sifter's current settings will reduce civilian false flags in suburban regions by 80%, without compromising enforcement accuracy in urban zones. Elijah's stomach turned. This wasn't passive bias. This was intentional, calculated, and profitable. He zipped the folder, encrypted it 3 times. Renata didn't even need to ask what he was about to do. She turned the car toward the FBI's field office. Without a word. Inside the federal building, agents scrambled when Elijah walked in, flash drive in hand, Renata by his side. Whitaker met them in the lobby, his jaw already clenched. What now? Elijah handed him the drive. Proof that Marcus didn't just design Redline, he sold it, promised it would target specific communities. Ava kept everything. Years of emails, prototypes, government endorsements. It's all here. Years of Morales, who'd just joined them, flipped open a secure laptop. Within seconds, the gravity of the contents showed on his face. Jesus, he muttered. This isn't just internal abuse. This is federal fraud, civil rights violations, possible war crimes depending on how this was used overseas. Whitaker nodded slowly, then turned to his team. Get me a task force. Full warrant set. I want every Viridian Tech server under lock before sunrise. Elijah stood frozen. This time, it wasn't fear. It was the realization that the truth, the real, ugly, undeniable truth was now in hands that could act. Just before dawn, black SUVs, armored vans, and federal sedans descended on Viridian Tech's polished headquarters, like a wave crashing against glass. Federal agents swept through the main floor, the server rooms, the executive offices. Rachel Glass, standing at her workstation, didn't flinch when the agents arrived. She turned to Whitaker and handed him her badge. Took you long enough. Morales walked through the strategy boardroom, noting the portraits of Marcus and the founding team on the wall. He stopped under one in particular. Marcus, standing proudly at a podium, a banner behind him that read "Rewriting Human Logic." He shook his head. No, he muttered. You just coded the same bias in better clothes. Technicians boxed up servers. Analysts copied every local file. Engineers were detained for questioning. But Marcus Devlin was nowhere to be found. Elijah watched the coverage from Renata's loft, his face unreadable. CNN, MSNBC, BBC, even Fox was forced to run the footage. The federal sweep, the stunned employees, the collapse of a once untouchable tech empire. But Elijah didn't smile, not even when the anchors praised him, because he knew it wasn't over. And his suspicion was confirmed when Renata stepped into the room, her expression grim. He's gone, she said. Marcus. His private jet took off 2 hours ago from a private airfield outside Santa Rosa. Elijah sat up. To where? They think Dubai. But the flight plan was changed mid-air. No extradition treaty. No arrest warrant filed in time. He clenched his jaw. They let him run. Renata shook her head. They didn't let him. They were too slow, too comfortable. They still don't understand how fast these people move when they're cornered. Elijah stood and walked to the window. Below, the city hummed. Different now. Not fixed. Not safe. But awake. He looked down at the streets and thought of his mom. Her chalkboard lessons. Her warnings. They'll make you invisible, son. Make them see you. He had made them see. But now, he had to make them remember. On a secure line overseas, Marcus Devlin answered a call. A voice on the other end said calmly, Phase 2 is still viable. The new shell company is in place. Shall we proceed? Marcus replied with a smile. Begin rollout. The boy won the battle. Let's win the market. The Capitol building looked bigger in real life. Not just in size, but in weight. History pressed into every step, every carved column, every echo that bounced off its marbled walls. Elijah Carter stood in the middle of it all, wearing a navy suit that hung a little too loose at the shoulders and pants cuffed one fold too many. Renata had insisted on the suit. They won't take you seriously if you walk in looking like a kid, she said. Elijah had responded, without blinking. They didn't take me seriously because I'm a kid. Still, he wore the suit, because he wasn't here to be liked. He was here to be heard. Inside the chamber, cameras rolled silently. Reporters sat shoulder to shoulder in the back rows. Civil rights groups filled the side sections. Representatives from both parties lined the semicircle, scrolling through notes, some glancing up at the boy who had ignited one of the most devastating ethical reckonings in modern tech history. Darnell sat in the gallery, shoulders squared, eyes never leaving his son. The same man who once mopped these floors, now watched his child prepare to address the most powerful decision-makers in the country. Elijah stepped up to the mic, cleared his throat. The room quieted. My name is Elijah Carter. I'm 14 years old. I live in Oakland, and I used to fix laptops at a community center after school. He paused. Let the silence stretch just enough. The system I exposed, the one built by Viridian Tech, wasn't broken. It worked exactly the way it was designed to. That's what scares me. Some lawmakers leaned forward. Others looked down, already uncomfortable. It wasn't just about math or code. It was about choices. Someone chose to treat certain names as risk factors. Someone chose to treat slang as a security threat. Someone decided that people who look like my dad, like me, weren't worth seeing clearly in the system. Gasps echoed quietly from a few corners. I didn't build the bias. I just exposed it. He clicked a remote. A screen behind him lit up with side-by-side data. On the left, a white user flagged once in 10 interactions. On the right, a black user flagged 7 times in the same simulation. Elijah didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just told the truth. I'm not here to impress you, he said plainly. I'm here because I want to ask you one question. He leaned into the mic. When the system sees us as threats before it sees us as people, whose job is it to fix that? A beat, then another. Nobody spoke. Darnell, sitting in the gallery, wiped his eye quickly, hiding the motion in his lap. Elijah continued. You give these companies contracts. You give them money. You call it innovation. But what you're really funding is automated exclusion. You're turning prejudice into policy. He paused one last time. And the people paying the price are the ones you never bothered to invite to the table. When he stepped back from the podium, no one clapped. This wasn't a place for applause. But the stillness that followed said everything. The silence was respect. By the time Elijah left the Capitol building, media vans had crowded the street outside. Microphones extended toward him like antennae. Reporters shouting questions as if they'd always believed in him. He didn't stop. But the headlines that night told the story for him. Janitor's son educates Congress on algorithmic racism. Elijah Carter delivers the most honest testimony tech has heard in decades. America listened. Now what? The same outlets that once labeled him a troubled teen or a lucky hacker now praised his composure, his clarity, his vision. But Elijah didn't feel triumphant. He felt tired. The work wasn't done. In fact, the work had only just begun. 2 days later, back in Oakland, Renata handed Elijah an envelope. Thick paper, gold seal. He opened it slowly. A new startup, Dignitech, had extended him an offer, Chief Technology Officer. At age 15. A symbolic gesture. Yes, but also a serious one. The company was founded by former whistleblowers, public interest technologists, and ethical coders. Their mission: build systems that empower, not erase. Elijah read the letter twice, then looked up at Renata. They really want me to lead? They don't want you for your age, she said. They want you because you've seen what they were too scared to look at. He sat quietly, thinking. He remembered Ava, still recovering in the hospital. Remembered the line of cops tackling his dad. Remembered every system that had flagged him as a problem before it saw him as a person. Then he smiled. Just barely. I don't want a title, he said. I want tools. Renata laughed. That's the right kind of ambition. That night, Elijah logged onto his encrypted server and saw a new message waiting. No name. No trace. Just 5 chilling words. Marcus is building it again. Elijah sat at the kitchen table. His father's coffee mug, pushed to one side, his cracked laptop glowing dimly in the soft morning light. The offer letter from Dignitech sat unopened beside him. The signature line at the bottom shimmered under the sunlight. Chief Technology Officer, Elijah Carter. But he didn't need the title. He didn't want the spotlight anymore. He wanted impact on his terms. By noon, the press would learn he had declined the offer. Some would call it humble. Others would speculate he wasn't ready. Few would understand that Elijah had made his decision the moment he realized what they wanted. Another trophy face. Another black success story they could tokenize while quietly continuing the same systems. So instead he launched Code Equals. Not a company. A mission. A non-profit tech incubator, rooted in community. One where black, brown, and marginalized youth learned how to code, not just for jobs, but for justice. He wrote the first lines of Code Equals charter himself. We are not here to just join the system. We are here to build new ones where the algorithm sees our stories, not our skin. It started in the community center, where he'd first learned how to jailbreak school tablets. He took the old computer lab, dusty monitors, ancient wiring, and rewired everything. He stayed up for 36 hours straight, installing safe coding environments, restructuring internet access, and painting the walls with murals that read, "Not just users, builders. Code is voice." Write loudly. Within 2 weeks, 20 kids were enrolled, most of them from schools where computer science wasn't even offered. Some had never touched a laptop that worked properly. One boy had been suspended last semester for tampering with district software. He joined Code Equals with tears in his eyes. Eva Lynn joined as co-founder. Her bruises fading but her spirit sharper than ever. She taught the students ethics before syntax, logic after legacy. She told them the truth no classroom had ever dared to say. Technology is not neutral. It reflects whoever builds it. Renata Shaw, ever the quiet fire behind Elijah's vision, provided the seed funding. She declined interviews, letting the kids take center stage. But she made one thing clear. "This isn't charity," she said at the first board meeting. "This is reparation in motion." Elijah refused to accept personal pay. Every cent went back into the lab, the students, and the growing digital curriculum they were building. A database of open-source tools and courses written in language communities could understand, not just elite coders. But even as the local buzz turned to national recognition, Elijah remained grounded, because he never forgot how this started. It was a summer evening in West Oakland when he had first learned what numbers could do. His mother, Ms. Dania Carter, had pulled him out of their tiny apartment. After dinner, the power was out, again, and she didn't want him squinting under flickering lights. She took a box of sidewalk chalk and knelt beside him on the crumbling sidewalk. With her hands she drew equations right there on the concrete. Fractions, variables, real-world math. "See this?" she said, drawing a curve. "This is life. It's not always straight. It rises, dips, climbs again. But if you learn the formula, you'll know how to find your place on the line, even when the lights are out." Elijah had asked. She smiled. Especially then. That image, her teaching with chalk instead of textbooks, lightless but luminous, stayed with him as Code Equals grew. It became the nonprofit's logo, a piece of chalk breaking open a wall of binary code. By fall, the media returned, curious again, not because of another leak, but because of what Elijah was building. CNN asked for a follow-up interview. So did NPR. Even tech giants that once funded Viridian Tech now reached out, hoping to donate, collaborate, get in his good graces. Elijah ignored most of them, because real change, he realized, couldn't be scaled the way venture capital demanded. It had to be grown like a garden, slow, rooted, human. In one afternoon class, a student named Zara asked, "Mr. Elijah, how do we stop them from building bad code again?" Elijah paused. He didn't say we sue them. He didn't say we vote harder. He said, we outthink them, we outbuild them, and we don't wait for permission. But even as Code Equals blossomed, the threats became more subtle. One night his domain host went down, unexplained outages. Then came an IP flood of bot traffic aimed at crashing their website. Then a grant Elijah had applied for mysteriously vanished, pulled due to conflicts of interest. He wasn't surprised. The systems weren't just fighting back. They were adapting. And so was he. He doubled encryption, moved backups off cloud. Ava built a firewall system that adjusted in real time. Coded by the students themselves, they named it Equalize, a firewall that not only blocked attacks but recorded them, archiving every attempted breach with metadata. Still, he knew the silence between attacks was always temporary. And one night, the next wave began. Elijah was reviewing student code logs from home. Darnell asleep in the other room, the neighborhood outside quiet, but never peaceful, when an email appeared in his private inbox. No subject, no signature. He opened it, just one line of text. "You've made powerful enemies." Attached was a screenshot. A dark web listing. An anonymous job board for contractors, leaked by digital activists weeks earlier. At the top of the page, priority target Elijah Carter. Objective, digital neutralization. Reward negotiable. Elijah's hands went still. He didn't panic. He copied the page, archived it, saved it to 3 locations. Then he pulled out his phone and called Eva. "I think they're coming again," he said. She didn't ask who. She only said, "Then we stay louder." And before he hung up, Elijah whispered to himself, the same words his mom had said when no one believed a chalkboard could teach freedom, especially when the lights go out. The next morning, Elijah received a USB drive wrapped in black tape, hand-delivered to Code Equals' mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single folder labeled, Project Sentinel. Marcus Devlin. Prototype. The skyline of Dubai shimmered with impossible confidence. Mirrored towers clawing at the sky. Light-bathed highways, looping like circuitry through the desert. It was a city built on reinvention. And Marcus Devlin had always been a man who knew when to disappear and when to re-emerge. In a private suite on the 42nd floor of an anonymous corporate hotel, he stood before a wall-sized screen, sipping imported scotch as glowing streams of data pulsed across a world map. His tailored suit was crisp, his tone even sharper. Phase 2, he muttered to himself, watching the final nodes activate on the global display. Cleaner, faster, smarter. He had escaped the collapse of Viridian tech with precision, fleeing days before the federal raids, rerouting funds through a constellation of offshore accounts, and rebranding himself through a series of shell companies. His real name hadn't appeared in public records since the congressional leak. His image had been scrubbed from tech bios and news panels. To the world, Marcus Devlin had vanished. But in truth, he'd only changed masks. His new venture was called Sentience Labs, registered in Estonia, headquartered in the Emirates, but operating with eerie familiarity. The company marketed itself as a behavioral prediction firm focused on non-invasive, early intervention systems, the kind of vague jargon that comforted investors and frightened no one until it was too late. Its real product was called Sentinel, a next-generation predictive learning algorithm. Unlike Sifter or Redline, Sentinel didn't rely on outdated language cues or redlined zip codes. It embedded itself invisibly inside school administration platforms, analyzing attendance, GPA patterns, body language from webcams, even search queries typed by students. The code didn't flag skin color. It didn't have to. It predicted future volatility based on social cues, historical profiles, and network behavior, all of which still leaned on the same systemic assumptions. Marcus had found a new way to automate bias, subtler, smarter, and far more dangerous. Thousands of miles away, Elijah sat in the Code Equals lab, staring at the black-wrapped USB drive he had just retrieved from the mailbox. No one had touched it. Ava scanned it for malware. Then again, then a third time, just to be sure. Only one folder lived on the device. Project Sentinel. Marcus Devlin. Inside were detailed white papers, code snippets, marketing briefs, and internal communications. Most were watermarked to a firm called Sentience Labs. Elijah scrolled through line after line of algorithmic structure. It was clean, even elegant. But behind the polished syntax was the same moral rote he'd seen in Sifter. A new face. Same sickness. "This is him," Elijah said quietly. "It's Marcus." Ava stood beside him, arms crossed. "Someone wants us to know he's back. Or someone wants us to stop him again." That night, Elijah couldn't sleep. He stayed at the lab, reading every line of code, every design doc. He knew what Marcus had done before. But this was worse. Sentinel wasn't a system built for policing. It was built for predictive discipline, designed to scan school children and determine which ones were most likely to escalate in the future. Not based on behavior, but on patterns that mirrored past flagged individuals. In other words, guilt by association, guilt by poverty, guilt by race. The algorithm wasn't labeling students based on what they did. It was labeling them for who they resembled. And the worst part, Sentinel had already been quietly deployed. A watermark in one of the XML config files listed a district identifier: Horizon Unified School District, Arizona. Elijah blinked. His chest tightened. He pulled up the district website. Sleek, modern, diverse photos on the homepage. But their tech partner? A vague mention of behavioral learning integration provided by strategic analytics firm Sentience Labs. It was happening. Again, the next day, as he prepared a public disclosure, Elijah received a call from a blocked number. A woman's voice answered on the other end, low and urgent. "I'm not a hacker," she said. "I'm a journalist. You don't know me, but I know you. I've been following Marcus's trail since the Viridian collapse. You need to see what I've found." "Who are you?" "I'll show you. Meet me at the Phoenix Public Library. Second floor. Tomorrow. Noon." Then the line went dead. Renata was furious when she found out. "You're not meeting anyone alone," she snapped. "You've already got a target on your back." Elijah nodded. "Then come with me." The library smelled like sun-dried paper and slow secrets. Elijah spotted her by the window. A black woman in her early 30s, dressed in plain clothes, laptop open, face calm but alert. "I'm Mia," she said. Investigative. I used to work for the Post. Got blacklisted after I published a story on algorithmic discrimination in college admissions. She turned her screen toward him. Dozens of files, flight records, shell company registrations, surveillance photos, all pointing back to one truth. Marcus had never stopped. He used the Viridian scandal to build his next act, Nia said. He cleaned his code, scrubbed the racial language, and rebranded bias as predictive insight. But it's the same game. She showed Elijah the kicker, a licensing contract between Sentience Labs and Horizon Unified, signed 6 weeks ago. The product had been bundled with a social-emotional learning platform, an educational smokescreen. They're already tagging students, she said. I've interviewed 3 families. One black boy was flagged as emotionally volatile after his camera caught him rubbing his eyes too often. He'd been crying. His mom had just died. They put him in remote learning suspension. Elijah's heart dropped. He stared at the screen, jaw clenched. This can't happen again, he said. But this time he wouldn't use another anonymous upload. This time the fight wouldn't be behind screens. It would be in broad daylight. He contacted Ava, Renata, Nia, then civil rights groups, youth educators, former whistleblowers, parent unions. They created a digital coalition. Exposed Sentinel trended within 24 hours. But Elijah wanted more than outrage. He wanted resistance. They launched a series of town halls, bringing families from Horizon Unified to speak. Students testified. One girl broke down, explaining how she was flagged for non-compliant behavior because she wore a hoodie every day, a hoodie that belonged to her older brother, who had passed away. Elijah stepped on stage at the final town hall and told the truth. They don't need slurs when they have statistics. They don't need shackles when they have software. The crowd rose to its feet. Back in Dubai, Marcus Devlin watched the footage from his suite. The cheers, the tears, the chants. He took a sip of water. His smile was cold. He turned to his assistant. Rebrand Sentinel as a health screening tool. Push it to Europe. Pull out of Arizona before the lawsuits start. But what about the Carter kid? The assistant asked. Marcus stood, straightened his cufflinks. Let him rage. As long as we stay ahead of the outrage, he'll always be cleaning up our shadow. Elijah receives an email from a Horizon Unified teacher. Attached is a document, internal notes revealing Sentinel's next test site, Baltimore City Public Schools, and the first school on the list, Booker T. Washington Elementary, his mother's old school. Elijah sat motionless in the code equals war room, staring at the email from the Horizon Unified teacher. His cursor hovered over the attachment, his body frozen in a mixture of dread and fury. He didn't have to open the file to know what it was. The subject line had said it all. Coming to Baltimore, you need to see this. But when he finally clicked, the air left his lungs. The internal document was a rollout schedule. Precise, bureaucratic, and damning. Phase 3 expansion. Project Sentinel. Pilot site Baltimore City Public Schools. Test site Sun 1. Booker T. Washington Elementary. His mother's school. The place where she had taught math in the evenings, when she couldn't afford childcare. The place where she would bring Elijah after class, scribbling equations in sidewalk chalk while waiting for her night shift to start at the nursing home. She had always called it sacred ground. And now, Marcus's ghost code, dressed in sanitized language and clean UI, was slithering its way into the very heart of that community. Elijah didn't hesitate. He called Ava, who was already in the lab running diagnostics on the Sentinel copy they'd recovered. We've got 2 weeks before implementation, he said. Maybe less. Eva's voice was sharp. Then we get to work. In the days that followed, disturbing stories began surfacing from Horizon Unified, and not just through formal channels. Parents uploaded videos. Students recorded voice memos. A 5th-grade girl suspended for nonverbal hostility after not smiling during a video class. A black boy removed from an advanced program because the system flagged his potential for volatility, triggered by nothing but his silence in a group chat. Teachers quietly instructed to check the dashboard before deciding on discipline. A dashboard coded by Marcus, branded as progress. Elijah and Ava reverse-engineered Sentinel piece by piece. And what they found wasn't a bug, it was a buried philosophy. The system weighted behavior by context. But context was defined by historical data skewed against children of color. It didn't matter if a kid yawned because they were tired. If the system flagged attention variance, the risk score jumped. It didn't matter if a student used AAV, African American vernacular English in a casual sentence. The natural language processor flagged it as coded language. The algorithm didn't need to be racist by design. It was racist by assumption. Eva slammed her laptop shut. This isn't surveillance. It's sentencing. Elijah nodded. And no one's asking these kids what they're going through. So they did. They organized a Baltimore town hall, just like they had in Arizona. Except this time, it was personal. Elijah reached out to teachers, student organizers, and parent groups. Renata funded buses and translators. Nia, the journalist, agreed to live stream it nationally. Word spread fast. By the time the event started, the auditorium at Booker T. Washington Elementary was packed wall to wall, standing room only. Elijah stepped up to the microphone, flanked by students on both sides. He didn't give a speech. He gave the mic to the kids. One by one, they spoke. A sixth grader who'd been flagged for low resilience because he asked to go to the nurse too often. His mother stood beside him, tears in her eyes. He has sickle cell anemia, she explained. You coded that as weakness. A Latina student whose browser history had been used to label her as culturally distracted. She had been researching immigration policies for a class essay. A teacher who said she felt pressured to trust Sentinel's ratings over her own instincts because arguing against the algorithm was frowned upon. The crowd murmured, cried, roared. Then Elijah stepped up again. He didn't speak like a genius. He didn't speak like a prodigy. He spoke like someone who had been that kid. I was once suspended for hacking a school laptop, he said. I wasn't hurting anyone. I was trying to fix a glitch. But they didn't see potential. They saw a problem. He paused, looked out at the sea of faces, hurt, hungry, angry. Sentinel was built to protect systems, not students. And systems like that don't deserve your children. The auditorium erupted. The next morning, it was everywhere. Elijah Carter returns to his roots and dismantles the future of digital discipline. Sentinel's fingerprint matches banned redline framework, experts say. Predictive policing enters schools until students fought back. Media outlets could no longer ignore the weight of what had happened. Protests broke out across other districts rumored to be next in line. School boards scrambled. And then came the headline that no one expected. Not this soon. Breaking. Marcus Devlin detained in Munich while transferring flights. Extradition to U.S. approved. It turned out Marcus had grown too comfortable in his exile. A single stopover in Germany had tripped a dormant warrant. The Department of Justice moved fast, possibly some suspected to save face. Elijah read the alert 3 times before letting out the breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Ava called. Her voice for once shook. He's coming back, in cuffs. But Elijah's expression didn't change, because he knew Marcus wasn't the end. Marcus was just the architect. The real virus was still spreading, not in code, but in culture. That night, Elijah received a legal notice at his doorstep. He was being sued by a coalition of investors who claimed his activism had damaged shareholder trust in emerging AI companies. The courtroom was packed, not with spectators hungry for scandal, but with people desperate for closure. Parents who'd watched their children be erased by systems disguised as support. Teachers who'd been forced to surrender their instincts to the dashboard. Whistleblowers who'd been punished for telling the truth. And in the center of it all, Marcus Devlin, shackled in a federal suit, no longer the polished tech prophet of press conferences past. Just another man who thought his privilege would protect him from consequence. He didn't speak during his arraignment. His lawyers entered a plea of not guilty, citing unlawful evidence acquisition and targeted political prosecution. But the evidence, the emails, the code, the testimonies, had stacked up like bricks around a crumbling legacy. Ava Lynn sat with her back straight, her voice clear as she described how she had been demoted for flagging algorithmic bias, how she watched internal directives shift from ethics to efficiency, and how the red line protocol was never a mistake. They knew, she said. They didn't want to fix the racism. They wanted to scale it. Renata Shaw took the stand next. She recounted how she had once been proud to back Viridian Tech, how she believed, naively, that investing in technology meant investing in progress. But the industry didn't want progress, she said. It wanted power. It wanted pattern recognition dressed as justice. And though the prosecution didn't formally call him, Elijah Carter was still in that courtroom, sitting in the front row, wearing a charcoal suit and a pair of beat-up sneakers with holes in the soles, a quiet reminder of where he came from. He didn't need to testify. His work had already spoken. 2 months later, Viridian Tech ceased operations permanently. Its intellectual property, including Sifter, Sentinel, and a dozen other ethically compromised programs, was seized and placed under the oversight of a newly formed Public Tech Ethics Board. For the first time in U.S. history, federal agencies declared that artificial intelligence used in public sectors would be treated like public infrastructure, transparent, accountable, and subject to citizen oversight. They called it a landmark shift. But Elijah called it a start. Tech giants lined up with checkbooks, offering him blank canvas roles, 2TO titles, board seats, multi-million-dollar buyouts for code equals curriculum, tools, even his own algorithmic frameworks. One offered to name an entire ethics lab after him. He said no to all of it, because to Elijah, the work was never about selling the code. It was about teaching people how to write their own. He invested instead in the communities that had been targeted, ignored, or used. He launched satellite code equals hubs in 5 major cities, each one built in the same model as the first community-run, youth-led, rooted in justice. And while Ava continued developing open-source anti-bias auditing tools, and Renata guided national policy conversations behind the scenes, Elijah returned to where it all began. Not to mop the floors, but to rewrite the story. Darnell Carter unlocked the door to a new building on 47th and MacArthur. A former factory converted into a training center. On the glass above the entryway, bold letters read, "Clean code, clean floors, tech maintenance with purpose." It was his dream. A place where janitors didn't just scrub keyboards, but learned how to debug machines. Where maintenance workers didn't just take orders from engineers, but became them. He taught his first class that spring, Introduction to Systems, understanding the machines you're paid to clean. And at the back of the room his son stood watching. Tall, quiet, proud. "Don't get used to me being silent," Elijah said with a grin. "I'm teaching the next class." Darnell laughed. "They're gonna need a translator for all your tech speak." That fall, Elijah returned to the executive floor at the former Viridian Tech building, now repurposed into a youth-led innovation hub. The marble had been scuffed. The portraits of Marcus and his founding team had been taken down. And the old janitor's closet, converted into a library. Laptops lined the shelves where brooms once leaned. Walls were covered in student projects, annotated code, and messages like, "We don't hack to break things, we hack to fix them." They called us users. We became builders. Janitors rise. Elijah stood in front of a new group of students, all under 18, all underrepresented in tech, all staring back at him with wide, burning eyes. "I used to mop these floors," he said. "I used to walk through that back door with a busted laptop in my hand, and everyone in this building looked through me." He paused. Let the silence do its work. They couldn't imagine I'd be the one who'd expose what they built. They couldn't imagine a janitor's kid would force the system to look at itself. A girl raised her hand. "But how did you know you were right?" "Back then?" Elijah smiled softly. "Because I'd spent my whole life feeling like the system wasn't made for me. And when I finally looked inside, I realized it was built that way on purpose." That evening, while reviewing student submissions, a notification lit up Elijah's phone. He tapped it. A headline filled the screen. "Senate introduces Elijah's Law, Ethical AI Standards for All." The bill proposed sweeping oversight of AI systems used in government, education, law enforcement, and hiring, mandatory bias audits, open-source architecture for all public sector algorithms, clear opt-outs, human-first accountability. The law wasn't just policy, it was principle. A declaration that technology could no longer evolve faster than justice. And it carried his name. He showed the notification to Darnell. His father stared at it for a long time, then said, "She'd be proud." They both knew who he meant. In the final hours of daylight, Elijah walked through the empty halls of the hub, fingers brushing against the chipped paint of a wall that once held secrets, now covered in student sketches of better systems. He stood at the front of the coding classroom, chalk in hand, and for the first time in years, he bent down and drew on the floor, just like his mother had. A curve, a slope, a rising line, a new equation. Because the arc of the moral universe doesn't bend on its own. Someone has to code it that way. As Elijah turned off the lights and locked the door, a billboard lit up across the street. "Coming soon, national rollout of Elijah's Law begins, with students leading the charge." Below it, the subheading read, "One kid changed the system. Now thousands are building the next one." No child should be punished for being brilliant. No parent should have to beg for their child to be seen as human. If this story made you feel something, if it reminded you that silence protects systems not people type, yes,